let's set the foundation, what the church is, the early beginnings, and tell that story.
Okay, the early beginnings of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which I guess my research started out as trying to defend my husband, trying to clear his name, all sorts of things. But the history is fascinating, Jessie. The history of dietetics, the history of the church, the history going back in time. It's not just the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but so many religions determine what people eat, when they eat, and why. And so that's also important. I've done a deep dive into a whole lot, and we'll get into part of that when I do a discussion on the blue zones coming up. But in particular, Seventh-day Adventist Church, because they came after my husband, I looked into their belief system. Why are they so pro-plants? If you look at the sanitarium here in Australia, it's the Health and Wellbeing Company. It's got wheat everywhere. All they talk about is, they say vegetarian. I would almost argue that and say it's vegan. They're promoting a vegan diet. They produce foods to take the place of flesh, meat, eggs, milk, and butter. So that sounds vegan to me. Anyway, I did a deep dive. I went right back, and originally I came across a work by a guy called Rhys Southern, and his website was Let Them Eat Meat. And he had specifically looked into the Seventh-day Adventist Church's influence on the American Dietetic Association, going right back to its founding, well, not to its founding, but back to when they started the vegetarian position papers. And so I thought, well, if they're that involved in the American Dietetic Association and dietary guidelines in America and pushing this plant-biased message, because I certainly looked at and I know recently the American dietary guidelines have flipped, but for the last 10 years I've been speaking, they have been a plate that didn't even mention meat. And in Australia, there's one piece of steak and maybe it's just a lamb cutlet, I think, and a little bit of milk and one egg or two eggs. And the rest is pretty much carbohydrates and fruit and vegetables and whatever else. So you have to send out a search and rescue party, Gary says, to find the meat and dairy on our plate. And I don't know if we'll change, unfortunately. I'm really hoping we'll be like you. But I was thinking, why are they pushing plants so much? Sanitarium Health and Wellbeing Company. Because they make plant milks, they make alternative meats, they make all of those things. And so I went back and back and back into it. So I looked at the vegetarian position papers in Australia, but then I've gone back in to look at the whole temperance health reform movement, I guess. That's where it started. Sylvester Graham and other temperance health reformers around the time, early 1800s, were starting to talk about the harms of, really, they wanted religious purity. They wanted people to have, to drop stimulants, which included tobacco and alcohol. They wanted people to give up meat because they felt that it made people have impure thoughts. It stimulated baser passions, and it was a leading cause of marital excess, too much sex, and masturbation. And so this movement was coming along there, and it had to be vegetarian, because if you think about it, even in Eastern vegetarianism, which is a lot more to do with metempsychosis and where you transmigrate between animal and person depending on karma and different things, it still has that purity concept, but it's much more about not harming an animal because you may be eating a relative or along those lines. Whereas the temperance health reform movement in the 1800s in America was definitely about religious, social, and sexual purity. But it had to be vegetarian because there was no way any religion in the entire research I've done tells people not to eat, say, ghee, because we need vitamin B12. We need the essential vitamins and minerals that an animal fat, at the very least, can provide people. And it wasn't until, I'd say, John Harvey Kellogg invented foods to take the place of flesh, meat, eggs, milk, and butter, and started fortifying that they were able to coin the term vegan in 1944. So when I've looked back, they were promoting a vegetarian diet, but really, really wanting it to move more to vegan. Ellen G. White claimed to have had a vision in 1863, the year the church was incorporated, even though she'd been having visions from 1844 all the way up through to then. This was her first big health reform vision. And there's a guy called, a research paper done by Sanchez et al. In 2016, and these are devout Seventh-day Adventists who've written about the health reform message and what it means to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and why Ellen G. White may have given it to them. And the concept of, separating yourself, because when you have a new religion, you need to have something that's going to make you different. So they say they follow a lot of the Levitical and Deuteronomy laws from the First Testament, but Ellen G. White took it further. She took it from unclean meats to all meat was unclean. She took this idea that all animal fats were unclean. Shellfish was unclean. Like, it's become a very broad concept that we should be eating fruit, grains, nuts, and seeds. Those that were in the Garden of Eden before sin is the God-appointed diet for man. And she said that medical evangelism was the right arm of the church. This health reform message was their entering wedge, and that public health education was a duty of the church. So if you think about public health education, the church, and I'll say the corporate church, I'll say the organization, let's take it to Adventism as an organization, they have created healthcare to be able to take the Seventh-day Adventist specific gospel, their gospel, to the world in places where they couldn't go into if they were just taking religion. So the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which I'll talk a bit later as well when I get to the Blue Zone concept, because it shows such stark reality, such stark contrasts between the Blue Zones. But the Seventh-day Adventist Church are the second biggest educators in the world behind the Catholic Church. And there's maybe 24 million Seventh-day Adventists baptized currently, and nearly 1.4 billion baptized Catholics who have the biggest educational facilities. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, with that small number, are the second biggest educators in the world. They are huge providers of healthcare, and in America, I think there's something like 144 hospitals, and over 30 are in Florida. As I say, in Australia, tiny physical footprint, very, very big messaging footprint. It was someone from the Seventh-day Adventist Church's sanitarium here who designed the algorithms for the health star ratings. So again, this front of package labeling has been designed by an employee of a cereal industry owned by a church who believed that flesh meat harmed not only men, but women and children, morally, physically, and spiritually. So, this is a really big message. She said that parents who placed flesh meat on the table in front of their children would not have their prayers answered. And that their ministers should not show such an evil disposition as to eat meat in front of anybody. And it's big. Her messaging, she's written 25 million words, 49 books. She's the most translated American author of either gender in the world. And her words have been taken around the globe. And the health reform message, as I say, it's the entering wedge to get to so many places and discuss. So when they're educating people, so many people come out of this education system as a doctor or a nurse or a healthcare worker or a dentist. And when I've spoken to people, because let's put the disclaimer here, should have done it much earlier. I'm not anti-vegan, anti-vegetarian, and I'm certainly not anti-religion. I'm pro-choice, and I think it's really important, Jessie, to understand that this choice is being taken away by the corporate and commercial organization under the umbrella of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. this ability to be able to make a choice to eat animal proteins and fats is being taken away. So if someone chooses to follow the Seventh-day Adventist Church's dietary beliefs, if they choose to go to church and that's what they want to do, I'm not going to criticize, I'm not going to challenge those people. But the people who are writing the guidelines, like Joan Sabat, who wrote the global influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on diet in 2019 and became a member of the Dietary Guidelines Committee in 2020 and was determining the caps on saturated fat, and he wanted it to be 0, then something like that needs to be highlighted and called out, because he's going into that position, highly influential, but with a devout religious belief that, so part of their gospel, part of the third angel's message of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Ellen G. White has attached this health reform message to the third angel's message. And they believe they need to give these messages, the third angel's message, to every person in the world. Whether you choose to follow that is your choice. It's not about mandating it, but it's about giving people that choice, because until everybody hears that message, Jesus Christ will not return. So this is their salvation. This is a very, very powerful incentive to be getting into places to create dietary guidelines, to getting into third world countries with healthcare. It's big, Jesse.
Well, it's definitely big hearing you describe the infrastructure here. And you mentioned the number of hospitals throughout the U.S., the impact in Florida with the hospitals. Loma Linda is one of the blue zones. We're going to get to that in a bit. I don't want to detour us. But how many of the Seventh-day Adventists are at Loma Linda versus spread out throughout the world?
A small amount. Medical missionary, that is the goal. Every single member of the church is part of their medical missionary evangelism. That is part of their understanding, that they have to either be giving tips to people about how they eat, they have to be running cooking lessons, they have to be running a CHIP program or Pivio Health, which is owned by Sanitarium here in Australia, and the corporate wellness programs that are also coming to America from Sanitarium here, and the food industry that provide foods and tell people how good they are, and then the churches and above. I said a few years ago to Judy Cho, the Seventh-day Adventist health reform message is literally sweeping across the United States and embedding itself into the very fabric of your society through so many different elements, Jesse. It's not just the healthcare, the education, and these corporate wellness programs. It's through medical clinics. It's through every healthcare professional who has been trained in that system. But it's also coming from higher up in governments. It's coming from policy that has been influenced by the church. It's coming from lifestyle medicine. And this is probably a good place to introduce this, which again was very unexpected when I started doing my research, and I think a very powerful group that is pushing this plant-biased messaging, and at its heart has come from Adventist Health Reform message. So the American College of Lifestyle Medicine formed in 2004, renamed itself in 2004, but was actually formed on the Loma Linda University campus in 2003. So I read that there's something like 17,000 employees at Loma Linda University Medical Center. So that's a big structure. So put that into perspective, that's how many people are actually just working there. And there's a lot of affluent retirees who go there to retire. And I'd say that is part of their claim of health and longevity. They're not necessarily people who grew up there or who were born in that space. They've moved there for work or to retire. But so the American College of Lifestyle Medicine was founded on that university campus, and all of the original board members, obviously, and members were devout Seventh-day Adventists, which makes sense. It was the Christian Association of Lifestyle Medicine. In 2004, it became the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and Walter Willett from Harvard joined the advisory board, as did there's a whole lot of vegan promoting people. Walter Willett was definitely there from 2004, and he was still on the board in 2020. I have not been able to find him on there since then, but he was definitely still there in 2020. So we're talking about a group of people who were aligned with their messaging again. So Walter Willett is at Harvard University, the School of Public Health, which was previously chaired by Fred Stair. Now, I think the symbiotic relationship between Harvard University and the College of Medical Evangelists, which was what Loma Linda was originally called, Loma Linda University, it was called the College of Medical Evangelists. Their symbiotic relationship began in 1948 when a guy called Mervyn Harding was wanting to prove, not disprove, divine inspiration by Ellen G. White and show that a vegetarian diet could be maintained and could be healthy. And he approached Fred Stair to become his doctoral supervisor for a PhD. And I just can't imagine. Here's Fred Stair, which we have found to be, the Harvard School of Public Health was bankrolled by Kellogg's, by Coca-Cola, by so many food industries at the time. That's where their funding was coming from. Fred Stair in particular was receiving industry funding from the sugar and tobacco industries. So you've got a man who's being paid to minimize the harms of sugar, demonize animal proteins and fats. He joins with this guy who has no financial incentive. It's just purely a devout religious belief, and he wants to prove that this is correct. So this is a powerful combination. They started publishing their research in 1954, and that became part of that very first vegetarian position papers, the conversations into that, and their work was also referenced in 1977 for the McGovern Report when they started talking about reducing saturated fat. So it's big. But now you've got Walter Willett, who's also joined with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine on Loma Linda. I do think that symbiotic relationship began in 1948 and it never stopped, because Walter Willett even talks in a research paper about Mervyn Harding and Fred Stair working together. So Walter Willett has joined, and you've got other plant-based people who have joined. And it was, if I got onto the Wayback Archive machine, and it's a fascinating place. I'm not sure if you or your audience are aware of it, but it captures websites at various stages since about 2000. And when there's a lot of activity on a website, it gets a lot of captures. But when it's fairly stagnant, there's very little that happens. And so I've gone back and looked at the Wayback Machine, and because the American College of Lifestyle Medicine never changed their URL, even from when they were the Christian Association of Lifestyle Medicine, I've been able to go back right through their history, whereas the European Society of Lifestyle Medicine and the Australian Lifestyle Medicine Association changed their URLs. So it's very hard to get back to the history unless you know what they were previously called and what their URL was. The American went right way back, so it was easy for me to have a look. And there was very little activity in that space until 2010, when a guy called Stephen Blair joined the advisory board. It wasn't that there was nothing, but it wasn't big. In 2010, Stephen Blair, who was called out by Anahad O'Connor in 2016 as the founder of the Global Energy Balance Network, funded by Coca-Cola, he joined the American College of Lifestyle Medicine in 2010. And so a lot of my research, Jessie, has looked at this symbiotic relationship between Coca-Cola, which shouldn't be there, because if you think about it, Ellen G. White said all stimulants were harmful. Her big desire was to stop masturbation. That's how it began. I did do a big jump there, and is it too hard to go back? I did a big jump, but I'll come back to it. And anyway, so you've got this idea that alcohol, tobacco, spices, and meat are harmful at Loma Linda. And here you've got Coca-Cola, as someone who's hugely funded by Coca-Cola. Stephen Blair, exercise is medicine, coming in onto the advisory board. And from then, their website numbers and their engagement and the changes in that website grew massively. They started having very big conferences. I think in 2013 or 2014, Coca-Cola sponsored the entire event with every single one of their brands. It's just like, I don't understand how a group that believed that caffeine is bad, because if you go to Loma Linda, there is no caffeinated Coca-Cola or any of those things. There's no tea or coffee. And here they are partnering with a group that promotes caffeine. So in my mind, I truly believe minimizing the harms of sugar and demonizing animal proteins and fats is more important than caffeine. It's more important than so many other things. And how does that sort of messaging come about? I'm not 100% sure, Jessie, but that is what I've uncovered. So they were happy to connect with Coca-Cola and have them sponsor their events. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine really started to create medical education. So not just doing conferences and talking about their plant-based living, and in so many ways, many of the pillars of health of the Adventist Church, lifestyle medicine, the blue zones, all of these things, they have a lot of things in place that are very sensible, very logical, and I believe healthful. They talk about reducing alcohol and tobacco. They talk about sleep and the importance of connection, having purpose, movement, all of the sunlight. These things are good. My only challenge is the diet. And the diet they promote is plant-based. And a guy called T. Colin Campbell, who did the China study, he stated, I think it was in 1998, that he developed that plant-based, he coined the term as a euphemism for veganism, because at the time when he was trying to talk at medical conferences and things, there was a real block in people talking about veganism because it became very much about animal rights and animal ethics. And he believed it was about health, and he just wanted to just take away that block that people got when they heard vegan. And so he coined plant-based as a euphemism for veganism. T. Colin Campbell was also very involved with lifestyle medicine. So we have got that group coming from there. They devised medical education, and this medical education and accreditation and being accredited as a lifestyle medicine health professional started going global. Not long after 2010, but certainly by 2016, it was in so many different places, and doctors all around the world, dietitians, health coaches, were all starting to get this incredible accreditation that they were paying for. But when I asked people here in Australia, I said, do you realise that the exams, that the curriculum, everything's been written by Seventh-day Adventist ideology and Coca-Cola? It's like lifestyle medicine and exercise is medicine. And if you consider what they're talking about, it's a really high carb, low fat, minimal animal protein, and a side of Coke's okay at the end. So yeah, that's where I started to look into the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. They really are getting their medical education concept. They're getting student bodies in different universities around America in particular to all be advocating for lifestyle medicine. And again, I promise, it sounds really good. And even the concept of a plant-based diet, it's starting to become a bit like, saturated fat causes cholesterol. It's being embedded into our psyche that this is just what it should be, even though we know that dietary fat, which Ansel Keys ended up saying, dietary fat has no correlation on cholesterol. So just because you pour fat down a sink and it congeals, our bodies are not the temperature of a sink. So fat does not congeal in our body, and we can utilize the essential vitamins and minerals that come from it. So essential nutrients, we have to understand that this medical education is big, and it's coming to all sorts of places all around the world from this ideology and this belief system and this symbiotic relationship with Coca-Cola, with cereal industries, with pharmaceutical industries. It's really big, Jessie.
Before we get to blue zones, I want to make sure we really hash out the history here of the church. Ellen G. White, you mentioned Graham, you mentioned John Harvey Kellogg.
I did, and I didn't go there. That's
Let's
what I wanted to come back to.
let's talk about any potential relationships there between those guys, and then how they went from Battle Creek, Michigan, down to California.
I'll do that in the Blue Zones.
Okay.
I'll do that. But I will talk about the fact that a lot of people have actually challenged Ellen G. White's writings, her beliefs, her testimonies to the church, and say 25 million words. They have questioned her as being an authoritative person who claims that all of her writings have come from God, and said that a lot of her early works, especially about her health reform message, has come from earlier temperance health reformers, which I've mentioned, were already talking about some of the things that she has brought into the church. But instead of being an itinerant preacher like Sylvester Graham and standing on a corner and promoting this idea, he also wrote some textbooks, and a lot of people bought them, and a lot of people, someone created graham crackers. He didn't invent them, but they bought them on the back of what he was saying. And where she took this into a doctrine in the church, of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and said that, so when they've said that some of her work has plagiarized other people's, the church has come around to understand that they can't actually say some of it wasn't plagiarized, because there are word for word or slight alterations between quite a few health reformers at the time in her writings. But they say she's been spiritually gifted writing. So God told her which parts of these other messages were the important parts to put into her writings, which is an interesting space. Very, very quickly, Ellen G. White, so it was actually Joseph Bates and Ellen G. White's husband, because she was Ellen Harmon when the church first started to form this remnant church. She was 17 or 16, 17 at the time. And James White was in his 20s, I think he was 25, and Joseph Bates was in his 60s. They were both from the Christian Connection Church, anti-Trinitarian church, and they really wanted to create, they really believed in William Miller's messaging that Jesus Christ was about to return. They were part of this movement in 1843, then 1844. And when Jesus didn't return in October in 1844, there was a small group, I would say led by Joseph Bates and James White, but Ellen was part of this. And because she started having visions, which were encouraged, I believe, by these men, they were how they were able to sell this messaging. So her very first vision was, it wasn't the wrong date. The date setting was correct. It was the wrong event. They just didn't quite understand what was happening. Jesus wasn't coming back to earth. He was moving from his holy place to his most holy place to begin the investigative judgment. Now, this concept, Jesse, is that the Seventh-day Adventist Church do not believe that atonement was fulfilled at the cross, which is a big difference in traditional Christian thinking. So they believe that it was started at the cross, but it wasn't till 1844, when Jesus moved into the most holy place, that he began to go through the books. And he is only going through the books, well, that's what they said at the time. It was actually a shut door for 5 years. So no one else could join the church. No one else was saved for 5 years. And then when they started marrying and having children, they realized they couldn't quite leave these poor children out. So the shut door disappeared. But the idea was that he was going through the books of only the people who'd professed that they were Christians, not the books of everybody, just the professed ones. And within Seventh-day Adventist Church, I believe it's a very, very legalistic concept. It's faith but works. And the idea is that you will never know if you're saved until Jesus comes back and you have... I should just say, if Jesus goes through the books and your name, say, Jesse, you've come up today and he's blotted out your sins, but he doesn't come back for another 20 years, you have no intercessor in that time. So in those 20 years, you have to have done good works. You have to have confessed all your sins. And if you've missed anything, then it's up to Jesus to determine how important that was, or how critical it was, as to whether you're saved or not. So it's an apocalyptic church and these people do not actually know if they're saved. So it's concerning. And this is part of the idea why this health evangelism is so important to them, because they consider Jesus the great physician, and they're doing his commission. They're completing his work on earth. Even though Jesus created miracles, they are physically helping people health-wise. So that's a distinguishing part. Ellen also told from visions that she was taken by her angel to other planets, and she met other beings on other planets that had the face of Jesus. And when she asked them why they were so perfect, because this is again very much a concept within Adventism of spiritual perfection, and she asked them why they were perfect, and they said that they had never taken from the tree of knowledge, the fruit, the forbidden fruit, and they were watching what was playing out on earth, because they were seeing if God's law was fair. And at the end of the world, when Jesus comes back, God has to be vindicated. We have to prove that it was right for God to allow us to sin and to make our choice as to whether we would stop. It's really quite, I think, very concerning for these people who are in this space. And maybe not everybody realizes how different that is to the concept of faith in Jesus alone is how you are saved. I wouldn't want to be in that system where I guess Martin Luther was calling that out so many, many years ago. And that's one of the very different spaces that the Seventh-day Adventist Church sit in. So as time went on, they got bigger and bigger. And John Harvey Kellogg's father was a Millerite, and then he became a Seventh-day Adventist, and he had a lot of money, so he invested for the church to move. Before then, they'd been itinerant preachers moving around. James and Ellen ended up getting married because it was considered inappropriate that she was a young girl traveling with these men, so they married. They had children of their own, but she truly believed, or they truly believed, in this concept of vitality. So a little bit of mysticism that was probably happening around the time of the burnt over district. A lot of new religions started in America around the 1800s, mid-1800s. And this concept of vitality. So to her, it was marital excess and masturbation were definitely contributing to a loss of vitality, but she also had a book that she was typesetting, or that she was writing. It was called A Solemn Appeal to Mothers. And John Harvey Kellogg was, I think, 4 when his father joined the church and paid for their printing press and was a huge investor in the Battle Creek, Michigan Sanitarium. But John Harvey Kellogg was 12 when he first went to work for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And if you understand, because they're apocalyptic, they believed that Jesus was coming back. John Harvey Kellogg and his, I believe, 11 brothers and sisters all stopped going to school because it wasn't necessary, because the world was about to end. So, but John Harvey Kellogg appeared exceptionally bright. So he went to work for Ellen and her husband, and his first job was typesetting her testimonies. But one of the very first books that he typeset was this Solemn Appeal to Mothers, and it spoke only of mothers deterring their children from masturbating. And she talked about soft mattresses. Again, at the time, a lot of children slept in the same bed, so she was about separating genders, but she was about separating children as well, so they didn't touch each other. She was very, very concerned about self-vice, and her main point in this book wasn't just spices and things. It was meat. Her main concern was meat. It defiled people, as I said, physically, morally, and spiritually. So you've got to understand, John Harvey Kellogg was 12, and he was typesetting this book where she's talking about the harms of masturbating. And she went through everything from losing her eyesight through to an inwardly decaying head. And he typeset. It was as if you put a pistol to your own chest and took your own life. She blamed criminal behaviour. She blamed epilepsy. So when people were brought to her with children with epilepsy, she insisted that they were masturbating. And so over time, I say, is it any wonder that when John Harvey Kellogg grew up and they paid for him to become a doctor, they employed him at their sanitarium in Battle Creek, and he did everything he could to prevent sinful intemperance. He did everything. He invented genital cages. He did circumcisions on young boys without anaesthetic. He caused a phimosis so that if they tried to have an erection, the penis tipped to the side and was painful to erect. He poured carbolic acid on young girls, on their clitoris, to stop them touching themselves. But he was indoctrinated in this since he was 12, Jessie. So in fairness, this was his worldview. And he also was desperate to invent food to take the place of flesh, meat, eggs, milk, and butter. He was a very smart man. He married a woman who had a home economics background, Ella Eaton Kellogg, and she and Will Keith, his brother at the time, they developed, I guess, a kitchen in the Battle Creek Sanitarium. And they started playing with food, inventing food to provide to patients who came to that facility. It grew from a place that could house about 40 people when he first started to a massive mega complex that could house 1,200 patients, 700 staff. Like it was very, very big. It became really, he started wearing a white coat. It became what we sort of know as a hospital today. And he did start including medicating people, not a lot, but a little bit, and definitely surgery. He started surgery, whereas it started off as a sanitarium where you'd go to heal and recover with sunlight and vegetarian food. So it changed over time. But at the beginning, this is what he was doing. And it was accidental that they flaked wheat in the late 1800s. By 1905, he had produced the very first commercially purchased alternative meat, and it was nut meat. It was, I think it was a nut cutlet that you could bake or fry. Then he produced, maybe that was in 1905. Anyway, then he produced protose, which was a gooey gelatinous legume-based log in a can that you could do things with. I did mention the American Dietetics Association and the formation. It was formed in 1917 by a woman called Lena Frances Cooper. She was one of the founders. She was John Harvey Kellogg's protege. And her first cookery book, every single recipe, you had to buy John Harvey Kellogg's inventions to be able to make them. So I say, not only did she start the American Dietetic Association, she was the very first industry dietitian. And that's how the American Dietetics Association started, with industry.
Since you made it to the end of this clip, I know you're going to love the full episode. Click here to watch. I'll see you over there.
This isn't reality. This is marketing a mythical longevity pill. Dan Buettner trademarked Blue Zones in 2005. In 2020, the Seventh-day Adventist Church bought